start. So hello everyone, my name is Dr. Tejal Lathia, and today we're going to talk about Thyroid Bulletin, which is a report on thyroid on the facts and myths that surround thyroid disease. And with me to talk about this is Dr. Gayatri Ganekar. She's an endocrinologist who's trained at Hinduja Hospital, Mumbai, and she currently practices in the Kalyan Dombivli area. Over to Gayatri to give us the facts and myths about thyroid.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Indian Dietetic Association and the Mumbai chapter for giving us this excellent opportunity. Dr. Tejal for her guidance, Anagha and Sukhada for this opportunity. So we'll go straight to the agenda of this meeting. So first we'll be looking at basics of thyroid physiology. Then we'll go on to the management of thyroid diseases. Then thyroid disorders and certain special conditions, we will be discussing about them. And the most interesting part of the discussion would be about various myths that surround the thyroid disorders. Yes, so thyroid gland, as all of us know, is situated in the neck. Thyroid, the name comes from Greek language where it means a shield-like structure. So thyroid gland is in close contact with the thyroid cartilage of the larynx, which has the shield shape. So the name has come from there. So this thyroid gland has two lobes, right and left lobe, and there is a connection called isthmus. Sometimes patients can have an extra lobe, which is called pyramidal lobe because it is triangular. So this thyroid gland secretes two hormones, T4 and T3. T4 is also called as tetraiodothyronine. It has 4 iodine atoms attached in it, and the active hormone is T3 or triiodothyronine. So the thyroid gland produces these hormones under the influence of TSH. So mind you, TSH does not come from thyroid gland. TSH is a hormone of pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is situated behind our eyes in the brain, and it produces multiple hormones. One of them is TSH. TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. It binds to its receptors on various cells on the thyroid gland and stimulates the thyroid gland to produce its hormones, which are T4 and T3. Coming to the functional unit of thyroid gland, it is called a follicle. A follicle is nothing but a group of thyroid epithelial cells which are formed in a circle, and at the center of the circle you can see the pale pink substance which is called colloid. Colloid is basically a storage bed of thyroid hormones. So thyroid hormones along with certain proteins are stored in the colloid, and they can be anytime used for body later on. So these are the basics about thyroid gland structure and function. So yeah, diet has very important role to play in thyroid physiology. First of all, we must be aware about goitrogens, which are basically chemicals which somehow interfere with thyroid hormone production. They can block iodine uptake in the gut. They can form complexes with the iodine, or they can compete with iodine at the level of thyroid gland, and hence they produce a relative iodine deficiency and produce hypothyroidism. They can be found in chemical pollutants as well as in the food. Then associated nutritional deficiencies like selenium, iron, and vitamin A also impact thyroid function. Selenium is very important micronutrient in the thyroid environment. It is a part of multiple enzymes which are important for preventing free radical injury in thyroid, as well as it is also important in producing the thyroid hormones. So selenium deficiency can damage the thyroid gland with free radicals, or B, it can lead to reduction in the thyroid hormone production. Iron deficiency can also impact because the thyroid peroxidase enzyme is heme dependent, which comes from iron. Vitamin A deficiency also impacts the iodine deficiency. Along with iodine deficiency also is involved in causing hypothyroidism. So yeah. So iodine is very important in thyroid production. We have just seen that the two thyroid hormones have 3 and 4 iodine atoms in them, and without iodine there is no thyroid production. Iodine comes from various sources, basically from the water and food. These are the common sources. The fortified salt, the iodine supplements in various multivitamin tablets or as separately as iodine tablets, and from food. In food, we must remember that seafood is a very rich source of iodine because sea water has the highest amount of iodine reservoir. So seaweeds and the sea animals contribute to iodine from the dietary sources. So So this is the recommended nutritional intake. So roughly we can say in children, the daily intake should be around 90 to 120 micrograms per day. In non-pregnant adults, it should be around 150 micrograms per day. And in pregnancy and lactation, it is generally higher, around 200 to 250 micrograms per day. Yeah, so this is the extreme end of the spectrum of iodine deficiency disorders. The iodine deficiency disorders were quite endemic in the previous times before the era of salt fortification. So this is picture from Congo where all the four persons are of the same age. If you can look at the boy, he's normally developed, he's euthyroid and he's not iodine deficient, but other three girls are grossly short. They do not have any pubertal development and they look very absent-minded, or the retardation is very gross on their face. So iodine deficiency basically initially leads to endemic goiter. The gland tries to increase in size, tries to work hard to produce enough hormones, but because iodine is not there, it is not able to do so. So when it is no more able to compensate, there is frank hypothyroidism that comes. And when such a hypothyroid mother gets pregnant, she passes on the iodine deficiency to her fetus. So fetus does not have enough maternal hormones and it does not even have enough iodine. So the fetus's neurodevelopment and the development of the thyroid gland get affected, and the result is the severe cretinism that you can see.
So Gayatri, can I interrupt you here? So
Yes.
what do you think, what about iodine deficiency disorder in today's age in a country like India? So if you remember when we were doing MBBS in our preventive medicine, we always read about northeast part of India having a lot of iodine deficiency. There were a lot of goiters at that time. So what is the current status now?
So currently, because of widespread practice of salt fortification and also fortification of many other food substances, the iodine deficiency disorders, the prevalence has really gone down. And currently there are certain belts which are known to be iodine deficient, but because of salt fortification, we no more see that condition. In such severe states, we definitely do not see.
So then the other side of the coin, Gayatri, that what happens if there's excess of iodine? What happens then?
Yeah, so excess of iodine is also detrimental. In the acute stages, it can lead to complete shutdown of the thyroid gland. So thyroid hormone production is inhibited when the thyroid gland is presented with a large dose of iodine. Subsequently, if the gland is normal, it can escape from this phenomenon and lead to normal thyroid production. But many times, if there is any damage in the thyroid gland, it is not able to escape. Okay, and in after the post salt iodine fortification era, there is increased autoimmunity which has been seen. So this thyroid autoimmunity, why it is seen more commonly now? Because the in the colloid we saw in the histology slide, so this colloid has thyroglobulin. The thyroglobulin, when it is in the iodine rich environment, it is more antigenic, so more antibodies are produced when there is iodine excess. So now the other side of the coin is also evident that the thyroid autoimmune disorders are more common in areas where iodine excess has been found.
Right. So that means we have to know about both. That is iodine deficiency, which we've known for the longest time, but iodine excess itself can also have its own consequences. Okay, please go ahead.
Yes, so where it goes wrong, when the thyroid physiology is not right, what can happen? So there are two types of disorders that we can see. One is associated with hypofunctioning of the thyroid gland, which is called hypothyroidism, and the other one is excessive functioning of the hyperthyroidism. So whether the thyroid is producing or which type of disorder it is depends on the TSH levels. There is a common misconception that low TSH means hypothyroidism or high TSH means hyperthyroidism. But in the first slide itself, we have seen that TSH doesn't come from thyroid, it comes from the pituitary gland. So there is a feedback mechanism between T3, T4, which are thyroid hormones, and TSH. Whenever T3, T4 are not produced in sufficient quantity, TSH goes high. It is a signal, and that's why it is called hypothyroidism. So in hypothyroidism, TSH is high and T3, T4 are low. Whereas in hyperthyroidism, T3, T4 are high and TSH is low. So patients can have symptoms or they may not have symptoms. So when the patients do not get symptomatic, it is just the beginning of the disease, or it is a mild form of the disease, or in technical terms, it is called as a subclinical disease. So we can have subclinical hyperthyroidism when patients do not have symptoms of hyperthyroidism, or we can have subclinical hypothyroidism when patients will not have symptoms, and the overt diseases in which patients will have obvious symptoms.
So do we divide only on the basis of symptoms into subclinical or overt, or there is any other way we can decide whether it is overt or subclinical?
Yes, so the other way to categorize the disease is based on the biochemistry.
Okay.
So if yeah, so in this slide we see that in when T3 and T4 are in the normal range but TSH is low, this is the disease which is called as subclinical hyperthyroidism. When T3 and T4 are high and TSH is very low, it is overt hyperthyroidism. When T3 T4 are normal and TSH is high, it is called subclinical hypothyroidism. But we must remember that TSH more than 10, whether it is associated with normal T3 T4 or low T3 T4, is always called as overt hypothyroidism.
Right. So that is why I just wanted to make the distinction that the definition of subclinical hyperthyroidism as well as overt hyperthyroidism not only depends on symptoms alone, but also the biochemical tests, because the symptoms, as Gayatri will tell us ahead, can sometimes be misleading.
That's right. So coming to the causes of hyperthyroidism, there are 3-4 main causes which we commonly see. First is Graves' disease, which is because of which is an autoimmune disorder. So we saw in the first slide that TSH acts as a stimulation for thyroid gland to produce T3 and T4. Now, in the situation of Graves' disease, instead of TSH, there is another driver. There is another key for the lock of thyroid gland, and that key is called as a thyrotropin antibody or a TRAB. So this antibody is produced in patients' bodies, and this antibody stimulates the thyroid gland over and above the TSH and leads to excessive production of T3 and T4, which subsequently, because of the feedback mechanism, suppress TSH, and so we get the picture of high T3 T4 along with low TSH. So on the right side of the slide, we can see some diagrams which are actually the images of an investigation called thyroid uptake scan, in which a chemical technetium is injected in the patients and the photographs are taken, and the photographs show the distribution of this tracer in the thyroid region. So Graves' disease, we can see in the picture where we can clearly see both the lobes of thyroid, which are darker and which are symmetrically involved, whereas the other picture is showing a patchy kind of thyroid. So this is the case of toxic multinodular goiter, which is the second most common cause of hyperthyroidism. The multinodular goiter has multiple nodules, some of which are overactive and some are underactive. There can be a single nodule along with normal rest of the normal thyroid, and that nodule is producing excessive T3 and T4. It is called a autonomously functioning thyroid adenoma. And lastly, there can be thyroiditis. So in thyroiditis, what happens is there is inflammation and there is damage to the thyroid follicles, and so the thyroid hormones which are stored in the colloid are leaked out in the blood. So transiently the levels of thyroid hormone in blood are high, subsequently they come down, and depending on the degree of damage, either the patient progresses, and I mean the patient becomes hypothyroid if the damage was too much, or the patient can come back and the thyroid can recover itself and patient can become euthyroid.
So
So
what I understand, Gayatri, from this is that one, if we want to differentiate the different types of hyperthyroidism, then a technetium thyroid uptake scan is the investigation of choice. And the second thing that I understand is that all hyperthyroidism is not a long-lasting disease. There are some variants which are short-acting as well, can be temporary, and either they recover completely or this hyperthyroidism can actually go on to become hypothyroidism. Is that correct?
that is correct.
Right.
And I would just like to come briefly to the epidemiology. The Graves' disease is the commonest cause. Around 50 to 60% of the patients with hyperthyroidism would be having Graves. Second most is the toxic multinodular goiter, then the thyroid, then the hot nodule or the autonomously functioning adenoma, and the thyroiditis. And overall prevalence of Graves' disease in population is around 1%, and females are much more prone to get into Graves, almost 10 times more compared to males. Uh, so this is roughly the epidemiology. We come to the clinical manifestations or symptoms of the hyperthyroidism. So there can be sudden weight loss, there can be frequent bowel movements, there can be nervousness, irritability, reduced sleep, palpitations, tremors, sweating, difficulty in sleeping, changes in the menstrual patterns, and fine and brittle hair. And a constant feeling of warmth is also commonly seen in such patients.
So, Dr. Gayatri, can I ask you a couple of questions here? So, sometimes we hear of this term called thyrotoxicosis, and then we hear of this term hyperthyroidism. Is there a difference between the two?
Yes. So thyrotoxicosis means high levels of T3 and T4 at the level of tissues and the manifestations that they are causing. Whereas hyperthyroidism means when that high level of T3 and T4 is coming from consistently stimulated thyroid gland, when the source of the high T3 and T4 is the thyroid gland. So thyrotoxicosis is a broader term of which hyperthyroidism is a sub part or a component.
Right. And one more question I wanted to ask you is that on the basis of these symptoms that you've enumerated, is it possible to differentiate between Graves' disease and the other causes? Or are there any other symptoms in Graves' disease which maybe when we see the patient or talk to the patient would help us to decide that this patient probably has Graves' disease?
Yes, so as we discussed, Graves' disease is an autoimmune disease which is driven by the antibody which is called TRAB. So just as this antibody affects the thyroid gland, it also affects the eyes and skin of the patient. So these patients can have specific manifestations which are called as thyroid eye disease, which is called thyroid eye disease or thyroid orbitopathy, in which they will have prominent eyes. They will have symptoms of frequent grittiness or watering or irritation in their eyes, and there will be swelling around the eyes, in the eyelids. So these, once we look at this patient, this is definitely a Graves' disease. So a rarer manifestation of Graves is associated with kind of swelling and hard appearance of the skin, which is called a thyroid acropathy. So these are the specific manifestations of Graves' disease.
Right. That's wonderful. And what about hypothyroidism, Dr. Gayatri?
Yes, so coming to causes of hypothyroidism, the commonest cause nowadays is the thyroid autoimmunity. So this autoimmune antibodies which are formed in the patient's body, they damage the thyroid gland, and then it leads to hypothyroidism. In the earlier times, it used to be the nutritional deficiency of the iodine, as we discussed about. Then there are some causes in which the thyroid gland development in the fetal stage of life itself is very it is detrimental. So there is congenital hypothyroidism that can be seen. There thyroid tissue which has been removed by a prior surgery or over treatment of a patient of hyperthyroidism can also lead to hypothyroidism. 99% of the patients of hypothyroidism have one of these causes, but rarely there can be a situation of secondary hypothyroidism in which there is damage is not at the level of thyroid gland, but it is at the level of pituitary. So TSH is low in such patients, but these patients are very, very rare.
So can you just clarify what the term congenital means?
Yes, so congenital means a thyroid deficiency or hypothyroidism that is existing since birth. So these babies basically have either defective development of the thyroid gland, so it does not develop completely, or it is located at some other place apart from the normal place of neck, or there can be some problem at the level of thyroid hormone synthesis, a functional problem at the level of thyroid hormone synthesis because of various enzymes going wrong.
So does this mean that if a mother has thyroid, her baby will have congenital hypothyroidism?
No, this is a common misconception. As we discussed, the most common cause is thyroid autoimmunity, which is not really passed on through the placenta. Okay, so the congenital hypothyroidism, the causes of congenital hypothyroidism are totally different compared to the autoimmune hypothyroidism, which is commonly seen in pregnant females. And however, the implications of the congenital hypothyroidism are very severe. So all the babies must receive universal screening for thyroid deficiency at birth.
So that's what I wanted to clarify, Gayatri. So, sometimes the misconception is that the mother has thyroid, then the baby should be checked. But from what I understand, what you're explaining to me, so congenital hypothyroidism can occur in any baby, irrespective of
Yes,
whether the mother has a thyroid
mothers.
or not. And all babies must be screened. Wonderful.
Yes.
Please go on.
Yes, so hypothyroidism also, because thyroid hormones basically affect all the organs and all the systems of the body. So they will have manifestations which are widespread. Many of them can be non-specific, like forgetfulness, fatigue, or muscle aches, weight gain, constipation, brittle nails, or menstrual disturbances. But some of them are specific, like cold intolerance, puffiness of the skin, dry skin, or delayed, a sign which is called delayed relaxation of the ankle jerk is also very specific. Then bradycardia or slow heartbeat is also very specific of hypothyroidism.
So just one question here. How specific is, I know you already talked about, but I want to just make the point again that how specific is weight gain and hair fall as a symptom of thyroid disease? Is it specific or no?
So weight gain and hair fall are multifactorial, and they are not really specific for hypothyroidism. Definitely patients with hypothyroidism have weight gain, but this weight gain, amount of weight gain and the cause is totally different. We'll be discussing about it in the later slides. So,
Right.
and amount of weight gain will be hardly 3 to 5 kgs. So
Okay. So if you're going to talk about it
yeah.
later, so please tell us about the investigations.
So as we have discussed, the biochemical investigations form the cornerstone of evaluation of thyroid disease, the T3, T4 and TSH levels. And along with that, there are free thyroid hormones can also be checked, which are more accurate, that is free T3 and free T4. They have to be checked in certain situations only, not in all the patients. Then sonography of the neck can be done if there is any suspicion for having neck swelling. Now here also I would like to clarify that thyroid, we have seen it is situated in the lower part of the neck, and often patients tend to confuse and they say that my double chin is actually my the neck swelling, which is because of the thyroid. So if the patients have any swelling in the region of thyroid, we ask for ultrasonography, which can show us whether the patient has any nodules inside the thyroid gland, and how are the nodules, whether they are single, multiple, and how are the characteristics. As and a thyroid may not have nodules, but because of swelling and inflammation, it can simply have some disturbances of the echogenicity. Thyroid uptakes can also, we have discussed, it is done in situations of hyperthyroidism with low TSH. And other additional blood tests include evaluation of the antibody titers, which are specific to thyroid, like anti-TPO and anti-thyroglobulin antibodies in patients with hypothyroidism, and TRAB or thyrotropin receptor antibody in patients with hyperthyroidism.
So can I just ask you one question here, Dr. Gayatri? So a lot of times we get these patients who keep on doing their thyroid antibodies every year, and then they say, they're increasing, they're decreasing. So can you just tell me what is the relevance of doing an antibody? Which is the situation in which you would do it? And what is the situation? Would you recommend doing it annually?
Yes. So anti-TPO or anti-thyroglobulin antibodies, once they are present in the body, they are present for life. So there is no point in repeating it again and again. And often the tighter range of that particular patient also remains fixed. So if somebody had hundreds anti-TPO, it will always remain in that range. And patients often tend to get panicked because of the value. But we must explain to them that the sheer value of anti-TPO doesn't really matter. The titer doesn't matter. Whether it is positive or negative matters. And the situations where we would like to do anti-TPO is especially in the conditions of subclinical hypothyroidism, when we want to start treatment or when we want to continue. So and in certain situations, which we will be discussing later, whether we are confused whether the slight elevation in TSH is because of a pathological problem or whether it is physiological. So in certain situations, anti-TPO have critical role. And also in general, for patients of hypothyroidism, once we must get them done to confirm that the cause is autoimmune hypothyroidism. And once they are positive, they stay in the patient's plasma for life. So it also means that mostly such patients will have to continue their levothyroxine life. But there
So
is
what I
definitely no point in repeating.
Right. So what I understand from what you said is, one, that the main role of anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies and anti-thyroglobulin antibodies is a diagnostic role. It tells us
Yes.
whether it's an autoimmune disease or not. It helps us to decide whether treatment is to be started or not. But once we've done the values and we know and we've interpreted them, there is no additional value in repeating them again and again. And we do
Correct.
not, the treatment given once started, the treatment titration, the dose titration does not depend
Does
upon
not
the.
depend on the antibody levels. That's
Lovely.
right.
Perfect. So please go
Yes.
on.
Yeah. So there are a lot of dietary instructions that patients receive from various sources, whether it is hyper or hypothyroidism. So as we have discussed, the ocean water, sea water is a very rich source of iodine. So seafood contains higher amounts of iodine. So in patients of hyperthyroidism, where they are in that toxic phase, we tell them to avoid seafood as much as possible. More controversial is the dietary advices that hypothyroidism patients receive. So coming to the straight to the point of brassica family vegetables, the cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, turnips, Brussels sprouts, and so on. So basically, these vegetables contain certain compounds called thiocyanates or cyanogenic glucosides. These compounds either form complex with the iodine, which is present in the other food items. So they prevent absorption of this iodine from gut, and they exacerbate the already existing iodine deficiency. or they can compete with iodine at the level of thyroid for its intake by the thyroid gland. So if somebody already has iodine deficiency, it will be exaggerated. And if the somebody is on iodine poor diet, they will get into iodine deficiency. But as we have seen, after salt fortification and after so much of awareness being created, now the commonest cause for hypothyroidism is autoimmunity. It is no more iodine deficiency. So now definitely patients can have brassica family vegetables. These compounds are more active in their raw form. With cooking, there is loss of most of these chemicals. So in cooked form, and these compounds are present in micrograms. They are present in a very, very minimal amount. So in the typical Indian household where half kg cauliflower will be cooked for around 4 to 5 people, the amount that the patient is going to eat will not really affect the thyroid status. So such patients should not be told to withdraw from these vegetables for their life.
So Gayatri, thank you for making it very, very clear. So what I understand is if I eat a large quantity of raw cabbage and I already have iodine deficiency, then it's a problem. But for most of us who are not iodine deficiency and will not eat large quantities of raw cabbage or broccoli or cauliflower, I think we're safe, and I think they can be consumed how we normally consume it, like sabji roti in the normal food. Great.
Definitely. Second thing is about soy products. So there are two aspects to soy products. Soy products delay absorption of the levothyroxine from gut. So they should be avoided for 4 hours after taking levothyroxine. And second is the soy products have some isoflavonoids which also act like goitrogens. But again, as I discussed, the amount is very, very less. So they do not really act in that goitrogenic theory, but more important is to avoid them in the first 4 hours. So patients can have soy products for their lunch and dinner, but it is better if they avoid it in the breakfast when they are taking it on empty stomach in the morning.
Wonderful.
Yes. So whether to treat or not depends on the many aspects, and TSH level is a crucial decision maker in that. So 0.4 to 4 is the normal range. So definitely no treatment is required here, but monitoring, if we suspect a patient to have any thyroid disorder, monitoring is definitely warranted. Then coming to subclinical hypothyroidism, TSH range of 4 to 10 comes in that subclinical category. The treatment is required in certain situations. So as we said, subclinical means the patient doesn't have symptoms, yet we want to treat, because there are many studies which are available which show that treatment in these situations is associated with more benefits or the beneficial outcomes for the patients. So these situations include pregnancy, infertility, where a patient is trying to conceive. It is better to keep the TSH in the ranges which are specific for pregnancy, which we'll be discussing, and patients who have positive antibodies, because even if the TSH is in the subclinical hypothyroidism range now, they are highly likely to progress to overt hypothyroidism compared to those who do not have the antibodies. So it is better to start treatment for them. Those who have goiter, menstrual disturbances, or neuropsychiatric symptoms, many of them benefit from starting levothyroxine. So levothyroxine trial is indicated in these situations in subclinical hypothyroidism. And any TSH, I mean anybody with TSH more than 10 definitely qualifies for overt hypothyroidism, and levothyroxine should be started in all the patients.
So Gayatri, what I wanted to point out here is, as you alluded to before, so it is basically the biochemistry which decides whether you treat or not, because symptoms can be misleading. And if we rely on symptoms alone, then, we may go wrong. I remember attending one conference and one doctor got up and said, but you know what, my patient has all the symptoms of hypothyroidism. So she has clinical hypothyroidism, but her thyroid test is normal. So would you treat in that condition?
No, there is no benefit of treating for symptoms, because in patients who have overt or subclinical hypothyroidism, many of them, the symptoms that they typically associated with thyroid disorders, many of those symptoms remain even after starting levothyroxine. So symptoms are really a poor way of correlating.
Right. So tell us about the treatment, Gayatri.
Yes, for hypothyroidism, the only treatment recommended is levothyroxine. Levothyroxine is nothing but synthetic T4. The normal T4 variant, which is secreted by thyroid gland, the same is prepared in a synthetic fashion, and it is administered to the patients. The levothyroxine should be taken, the tablet should be taken on empty stomach in the morning, and patient should observe a gap of around 30 to 40. They should not have any food in their stomach for at least last 3 to 4 hours. And basically the levothyroxine gets absorbed from gut, but the acidic environment in the stomach affects its absorption. So we have this fasting requirement, and the amount of levothyroxine which is absorbed in the fasting state is almost 80%, whereas only 65% of levothyroxine is absorbed if it is taken with coffee or if it is taken with breakfast.
Right. But you know what, Dr. Gayatri, so just very recently, this past week, I had an elderly patient, not elderly patient, I'm sorry, but a perimenopausal woman of about 50 years of age. And she had been prescribed something which was called as triiodothyronine or T3. Now, is this usually recommended in treatment, and would you have prescribed it in that particular patient?
So in the first slide, when we saw the physiology of thyroid, we know that the predominant hormone which is secreted by thyroid is T4. At the level of cells, this T4 gets broken down to T3 by various enzymes. And these enzymes are present widely in all the cells of the body. So levothyroxine treatment, whenever we give patient levothyroxine, it is converted to T3, which is active hormone at the level of cells of the patient. So we need not give T3 separately. And conditions where this step is not possible are very, very rare. So in only those situations, there is some rationale behind combining levothyroxine and lyotriode, or sometimes giving LT3 or T3 alone. And in definitely patients with who are in this perimenopausal category, or in those patients who are elderly, who can be having underlying cardiac issues, treatment with T3 should be avoided because it can exaggerate osteoporosis, it can lead to atrial fibrillations and so on.
And also one more point I wanted to make, Dr. Gayatri, and this is something that, I'm doing a lot of work in communication between doctors and patients. And what I've realized is that if you talk to patients like they have a disease, then what happens is they make it into this big thing in their mind. So whenever I explain about thyroid disease, I always tell them that you don't have a thyroid disease. All you have is a deficiency. So just like if you're low in vitamins in your body, you would take vitamins. The same way, because your thyroid gland is not able to produce enough, so it's not completely non-functional. Your thyroid gland is working but is not able to make enough to fulfill the needs of your body, and that is why this is just a deficiency and not a disease.
That's right.
Right, please go ahead. And what about the treatment of hyperthyroidism, Gayatri?
Yes, for hyperthyroidism, the oral medications which are available are called anti-thyroid drugs. There are three commonly used drugs: carbimazole, methimazole, and propylthiouracil. Along with these drugs, to control certain symptoms of hyperthyroidism, beta blockers are used. And it is very important to give calcium supplements to such patients, because in the thyrotoxic phase, there is quite a bit of bone loss. And in that, it can lead to osteoporosis or reduced bone density over time. So calcium supplementation is also very important. And then other forms of treatments are available for hyperthyroidism, like radioactive iodine treatment or surgery.
Great. So yeah, would you like to shed us some light on how the treatment is different in pregnancy?
Yes, so in pregnancy, because of many hormonal changes and fluctuations which happen, and also because of the increased requirements, because the fetus is not able to produce its own thyroid hormones till about 20 weeks of gestation, that is 4 to 5 months. The baby is totally dependent on mother's thyroid hormones. So in this critical situation, the thyroid hormone requirement and the iodine requirement is more. So if the patient pre-pregnancy onset hypothyroidism, the dose of levothyroxine needs to be increased. So roughly most patients require about 30% extra dose. So in a week's time, you can say about 2 extra tablets per week they require. And often if the patient has had a milder kind of or a subclinical kind of disease before pregnancy, it gets decompensated because of the increased needs. The thyroid cannot anymore compensate for the increased needs of pregnancy, and then it gets uncovered in pregnancy. So such patients require levothyroxine treatment.
And what about hyperthyroidism, Gayatri?
Yes, the major hormone during pregnancy, which is the HCG, or the human chorionic gonadotropin, comes from placenta, and its levels are very high in the first 3 to 4 months. After that, they automatically reduce. This hormone has structural similarity to TSH. It also stimulates the thyroid gland in similar way, but it is much less potent. But in pregnancy, because it is present in high amounts, it leads to stimulation, and T3, T4 levels are high and TSH is often low. This condition is called as gestational thyrotoxicosis. And another important caveat here is whenever HCG levels are high in a particular patient, they have the symptoms of hyperemesis gravidarum. So the patient subgroup which comes to us in the first few weeks of pregnancy with excessive weight loss, vomiting, reduced food intake or ketosis sometimes can also have gestational thyrotoxicosis. So we must watch for it, and we must remember that this is a reversible condition. It is going to restore itself after first 4 months. So we need not start antithyroid medications for such patients. However, if the patient has Graves' disease, the antithyroid medications can be continued. There are certain points about it, but they can be given.
So what I'm learning from you is, Dr. Gayatri, here, that as a nutritionist, if you see a patient in the first 3 months of pregnancy, and if they're losing a lot of weight, they're vomiting a lot, it's a good idea to get the thyroid test done, because that could be responsible for the thyrotoxicosis, right?
That's right. That's right.
So this is what I specifically wanted to ask you, that how is the treatment target different in pregnancy as compared to, a non-pregnant individual?
So in pregnancy, as we have discussed, there are a lot of changes and fluctuations, and intrinsically the thyroid hormone levels are high and TSH is low in the first 3 months. So there is this data, there are various studies, and the large amount of data suggests that the best beneficial effects or the best beneficial outcomes of pregnancy come with these particular trimester specific ranges. So in the first 3 months, the highest TSH limit should be around 2.5, and in the next 6 months, we have to keep it around 3. However, subsequently, even larger database was available, and it was often seen that the TSH range is not a absolute number or absolute value which is followed universally, but it depends on a lot of factors like ethnicity and race, racial differences in the population. So we must follow what is called as population specific reference ranges wherever these are available. Otherwise, a thumb rule is to take the upper normal limit, and reduce it by 0.5 units from the non-pregnant state.
So what I understand, Dr. Gayatri, and if you will also agree, is that still some of the reports which we are getting from all the labs are showing this first column, which is 0.1 to 2.5, 0.2 to 3, and 0.3 to 3. What I understand
Yes.
from what you're saying, at least in the Indian population, if you just have the upper limit of a non-pregnant woman, you just subtract 0.5, and that should be the target throughout pregnancy.
That's right.
Absolutely. Love. Okay. So tell us about lactation.
So in lactation also, patients who have hypothyroidism and who need levothyroxine can safely continue. Many patients have this notion that if the hypothyroidism, especially if it was diagnosed during pregnancy, after delivery they just forget or they deliberately stop taking their levothyroxine, but it is totally safe. There is some concern about levothyroxine being secreted in the breast milk, but the amount in which it is secreted is totally safe for the baby. There is no harm. So levothyroxine should be continued, and the patient should be frequently monitored, because there are a lot of changes, hormonal and immunological changes, which happen around this postpartum period, and so the requirements of levothyroxine may increase or they may decrease. So we must monitor such patients and continue their levothyroxine.
Lovely. And what about thyroiditis? So what would be the symptoms, and what would cause anybody to think that this patient may possibly be suffering from thyroiditis in the postpartum or the lactational period?
So in a postpartum state, patients generally tend to have weight loss. But if somebody is having a weight loss which is which is much more than expected, then probably they could be having something more than just breastfeeding related weight loss. So in such patients who have extreme weight loss and who have frank symptoms of hyperthyroidism like palpitations, tremors, we must look at the thyroid profiles to rule out what is called as postpartum thyroiditis, which can be seen in about 5 to 10% of the pregnancies, especially if the patients had anti-DPO antibodies positive.
Right. And what about hyperthyroidism? So we have no other options. So is it safe to continue the antithyroid drugs in the postpartum period?
So anti-thyroid drugs are definitely not as safe as levothyroxine, but they are required. There is no option. So they have to be given to patient in such a form so that it should not, the minimal amount of ATD should enter the breast milk. So they are ideally advised, patients are advised to take them after feeding. And they should also do frequent monitoring, and the minimum possible doses of anti-thyroid drugs should be continued during lactation.
So I just had one question here. So what happens is that a lot of times, patients are told, after pregnancy, your dose will be stopped permanently. So what is your comment on that? How do you decide whether somebody needs levothyroxine to be continued in the postpartum period or does not need to be continued?
Okay. So if the hypothyroidism was diagnosed during pregnancy, such patients at the time of delivery, they should continue with the dose, and at 6 weeks post delivery they should be told to monitor their thyroid function test, and depending on that report we take a call whether we need to continue the same dose, whether we need to reduce, or whether we need to stop. And we should also get the antibody levels done if not already done in the pregnancy, because they will help decide about the future whether a patient needs monitoring or and if the patient had pre-pregnancy onset hypothyroidism, and we saw that 30% increase in the dose requirement is required during pregnancy, so often such patients can go back to their pre-pregnancy doses of levothyroxine.
But they don't have to stop without consulting their endocrinologist.
They don't have to. Yeah, they have to monitor as per the instructions.
Okay, so tell us about an elderly patient, Dr. Gayatri, that what is the status of the hypothyroidism and what any comments you have?
So elderly population, we have to be very careful with them because there is more prevalence of subclinical hypothyroidism. But we must remember that as we age, naturally, physiologically, the TSH tends to increase. So around 0.06 units per decade, the TSH tends to increase. So in those who are more than 65 to 70 years of age, their TSH is going to be slightly higher than the younger population. And this is a physiological adaptation to reduce the metabolic rate of the body to improve the longevity. Basically, it helps in longevity. That's why the nature has chosen this change. And so in such patients, when we are not sure whether the fluctuations in TSH are related to physiology or there could be some underlying pathology, other factors like anti-TPO antibody, presence of goiter, presence of family history will help us in deciding. But while starting the levothyroxine, we must remember the notion of starting low and going slow, because the elderly people often have underlying cardiac diseases which can get decompensated if you start with a higher dose of levothyroxine. So we must start with the smallest possible dose and we must monitor it slowly. And the symptoms in the elderly are also not very specific. As such, hypothyroidism is associated with non-specific symptoms. But in elderly population, they can simply have excessive fatigue or disinterest, depression, dysthymia, or apathetic kind of behavior. And they can also have unusual symptoms like atrial fibrillations or congestive heart failure. And so we must be careful in this population.
So just today, I had a lady in the OPD who had a TSH of more than 100. She was 70 years old. She had chronic kidney disease. She had undergone a bypass about 6 months ago. So that's why I had to be very careful when I started the levothyroxine. I started with just 25 microgram. I explained to the family that I'm going to increase by 25 microgram every week and very gradually build up the dose to avoid having any, congestive cardiac failure in this patient. Okay, so I think let's come to the most interesting part is the myths about the thyroid, which both of both of us have been, discussing about. And again, today I had two girls in my OPD, both of them young, 24, 25 years old, both of them who had these 5 and 7 thyroid reports. And doctor, I have put on so much weight. So coming to the first myth about the thyroid, and that is all overweight and obese people have hypothyroidism and they need to be treated. So what comments do you have on this, Gayatri?
So in hypothyroidism, in patients with overt hypothyroidism, there is definitely weight gain. This weight gain is related to fluid retention and retention of the collagenous products in the body. And this weight gain is about 3 to 5 kgs, not really more than that. And once you start such patients on levothyroxine, once their biochemical reports show that they are euthyroid, the weight also reduces because there is loss of that fluid as the patient ensures euthyroidism. So whatever is the excessive weight gain is not really related to your thyroid. So all patients with obesity or overweight definitely do not have thyroid dysfunction. And if at all a patient of hypothyroidism has weight gain, it need not be always that it is because of the thyroid problem, but other issues like reduced stimulation or reduced or fatigue, overall muscle aches and pains, probably they lead to sedentary lifestyle. So we must look at the lifestyle issues when such patients have weight gain.
What I also think, Gayatri, is that for the longest time, I think both doctors, nutritionists, as well as patients, we use that borderline thyroid to kind of hide behind and, not examine the person more closely. So I think that also it's an opportunity to go more in detail about the reason for the weight gain and not just blame the thyroid. Okay, so coming to some other very common misconceptions which are there in our country, which is that, if a woman has thyroid, she can't get pregnant. So what about this?
So having thyroid disorders affect the ovulation, and the menstrual disturbances are very common in hypo as well as hyperthyroidism. So there can be definitely some delay in getting pregnant, but once the patient is started on appropriate treatment and once she is biochemically euthyroid, there should not be a problem. So such patients, it is a wrong notion or wrong concept to say that such patients cannot get pregnant.
Right. And sometimes, this pregnancy part, what I've written, so I've had this own experience that one of my patients, the minute she got pregnant, the mother-in-law said, stop the thyroid medicine. So are there any issues with safety in pregnancy?
Levothyroxine is a pure hormone. It is a synthetically prepared hormone, and there are practically zero adverse effects, and it's totally safe for use throughout the pregnancy. So it should not be stopped just because the patient has got pregnant. In fact, it will make the situation worse because, as we have discussed, the requirements increase, and we need to increase the dose. Whereas if the patient stops at such a stage, there'll be definitely a lot of issues.
I also think that, a lot of women go to nutritionists, before they plan pregnancy. I think it's a great time for even the nutritionist to make sure that the patient has at least one thyroid report before she goes into pregnancy. Because as you very correctly said, a lot of times there are no symptoms at all and the patients have very high TSH. So I think, the nutritionist is the right person because she probably interacts with the patient. Doctors often, in the busy practice, they may not even ask, but I think nutritionists can play that role and make sure that, any woman entering pregnancy at least has one thyroid function report. The
They can
postpartum,
sensitize the patients for thyrovigilance.
just sensitizer and maybe, just give, that one extra word from a healthcare professional saying, please continue your thyroid medicine would probably make it more, the patient would be
Yeah.
more serious about it. The postpartum and the lactation period, you've already clarified that most of the times the thyroid medication will not be stopped. And if at all it can be stopped, it's not until at least 6 weeks postpartum where the patient should get the blood report, talk to the endocrinologist, and only then, go ahead. It's
They
safe
can
to
stop. Yeah.
breastfeed the baby. And I don't think there should be any problems with that. Okay. Before we move on to the next slide, what I also wanted to ask you is about these young children. You get a lot of these obese children who come to us, and, there's a borderline thyroid, and then the mothers are all in a panic, the parents are all in a panic, and they all think, oh, thyroid hai isliye mera bachcha mota hai. What are your comments on that?
So hypothyroidism in kids leads to weight gain, but it also affects the height. So overt hypothyroidism leads to short stature. So a short and obese child is likely to have hypothyroidism than a child who is tall and obese. So the children with the borderline kind of TSH. So just as in obese people, we have something called as insulin resistance. The insulin is not able to do its role properly. So the insulin levels are high in body. Similarly, there is TSH resistance. There is a phenomenon of TSH resistance, and the hypothalamic set point for TSH is elevated. So such patients, on the account of their obesity, have a slightly high TSH levels. So the obesity is causing the subclinical hypothyroidism rather than the reverse. So the slight high TSH is definitely not the reason for weight gain in such children, and we must go in details about the weight gain.
Right. Okay. So some other myths. Oh yeah, this is my favorite one. So my yoga teacher is teaching me specific exercises to target my thyroid. And if I eat XYZ, then my thyroid will get better. And also, my alternative therapy specialist told me if I avoid these things, then my thyroid will get better. So what are your comments on that?
Yes, so patients often have this fear at the back of their mind that once they start levothyroxine, it will be lifelong, continued lifelong, and it may affect their kidney, liver, or other vital organs. So they want to find a way of going beyond, and they want to stop it in one or the other way. The tablet is totally harmless. It has practically no adverse effects. And moreover, yoga or other kind of exercises. So thyroid is a gland. It's not a muscle. So yoga or any kind of exercise which helps in building muscle will definitely not help healing a thyroid disorder. And thyroid, once damaged, cannot regenerate. So as you rightly said, that it is the deficiency which comes from slight damage in the thyroid and not really a disease. So this deficiency cannot be covered up by any amount of food or diet or any kind of exercise. So exercise, yoga is very good. It has pleiotropic positive effects. So it is beneficial for stress reduction and weight loss and so many other things. But in specific sense related to thyroid disorders, it does not have any role, and neither does any fat diet have any role in curing thyroid illnesses.
So you're not dissuading people from doing yoga, but you're just trying to tell me, please don't have too much expectations from yoga. It's not going to get miraculously cured.
And continue your thyroid medication while you're doing your yoga.
Perfect. And what about the medication? So the commonest thing we हमारे body को आदत पड़ जाएगी, I will get addicted to the medicine. How do we explain this to patients?
Yes, so probably we can, as you have already told us, that the right approach will be to educate them in a way that it is a deficiency and not the disease. So that fear of taking a medication will go away. And plus, we can emphasize every time that it's totally safe. It can be, even the children who have congenital hypothyroidism have to take it from that small age, and it is totally safe to continue. Pregnant patients take it throughout their pregnancy. So we can give them such examples of safety. And also because it is a pure hormonal preparation, it does not have any other effects on other parts of the body, so there are no effects on the other organs, so we can definitely emphasize on the safety, and we can ask them to continue.
So no problems with kidney and liver and brain or anywhere in the body?
Nowhere. If the patients are taking other medications, especially the iron supplements or calcium supplements, they have to keep a gap of at least 4 hours between their levothyroxine and especially iron and calcium medicines.
Okay, so that's the only thing they need to remember, that iron calcium tablets have to be taken at a separate time, and soy products also, as you said, there should be a 4-hour gap,
4
but
hour
other
gap.
nothing to worry about.
No.
So you already actually briefly, talked about this, but just once more, lot of time what happens is because the kids first go to the nutritionist, and then there's a borderline TSH elevation, and then they're told, oh, you're fat because of the thyroid, please go to the nutritionist. Could you just once more tell us about that altered set point and the connection between the two?
Yes. So obesity, there is increased fat mass. So this increased fat mass leads to resistance in the action of at the level of hypothalamus. It leads to resistance in the action of TSH. So normally body requires higher amount of TSH in obese patients compared to non-obese patients. That's why there is altered set point, and so the slight elevation in the TSH is because of weight gain rather than the reverse. So this is TSH resistance, and with substantial weight loss, this can also be restored. So the treatment for this is not really levothyroxine, but weight loss.
And Gayatri, I also wanted to highlight there are a lot of studies where in patients who undergo bariatric surgery, those whose
Yes.
TSH is higher post the weight loss, there's a complete crash in the thyroid and
Yes.
a huge reduction in the dose. So one of my patients, I remember before she went for the bariatric surgery, she was taking at least 200 micrograms. So she was not able to stop the medication completely, but the need for thyroid came down greatly. And now she is, around 75 micrograms and she's perfectly okay. So yes, we
That's
do
right.
expect. So we also have evidence, scientific evidence, which says that weight loss will help to get the TSH down as well. It cannot cure the autoimmune thyroid disease, but maybe the dose that you require and the quantity may go down.
It will reduce.
And as you highlighted, that a TPO antibody is a good test to do, because
Yes.
that would help us to predict whether this is going to progress and may also help us to differentiate between the two.
That's right.
So would you like to summarize whatever you've told us? Any points that you want to talk about?
Yes, it's very significant to distinguish between clinical and subclinical diseases. Symptoms are definitely not our targets for treatment. Symptoms are not specific in hypothyroidism. In all pregnant women, we must take the opportunity and check their TSH as soon as they meet us for the first time. And there is no specific diet or any lifestyle modification for thyroid. For that matter, there is nothing apart from levothyroxine that can help a patient with hypothyroidism.
So,
So these are
so
the,
one of the things
yeah.
I say is patient वो पूछते हैं मुझे कि डॉक्टर क्या क्या खाना है, क्या क्या नहीं खाना है, तो मैंने बोला आप सब कुछ खा सकते हो, सिर्फ गोली खाओ. Because when
That's
you're
right.
taking the levothyroxine, whatever may be your diet, even if you're eating huge quantities of cabbage and cauliflower, the levothyroxine dose
Will
adjusts.
take care of it. Yes, the dose adjustment will take care of it. And also it leads to another question that there are a lot of multivitamin preparations which are available for thyroid support, the
Yes.
nutraceutical supplements, so called. So are they really required? So apart from iodine, all other components which are required for thyroid hormone synthesis are abundant in our diet. So once we take care of the iodine by having a fortified salt, iodine fortified salt, we really need not take any such multivitamin preparations.
Thank you
So
so much, Gayatri. That was really enlightening. I really enjoyed it. And let's all whatever she has said is perfectly bang on. And only that weight and thyroid needs to be sorted. We need to look for more, treatment options rather than focusing on the thyroid, and probably not
that's
allow
right.
people to hide behind their thyroid.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here today.
And Sukhada and